This video is brought to you by the Ridge Wallet. Hey, Wisecrack, Greg here. When making a short list of really funny things, chronic despair and unrelenting anxiety probably don't make the cut. So why are so many comedians these days talking about their mental health? And more importantly, why is it so freaking funny?
I knew that I was gaining weight because my belt stopped fitting around my neck the same way that it used to.
Indeed, over the last few years, and especially since Robin Williams' tragic death in 2014, we've seen more and more comics make material out of their struggles with depression, anxiety, and other mental health issues. Pete Davidson, for example, has made a running gag of his mental health issues on Saturday Night Live.
Oh, no. I was born depressed, but it might make me feel better if I was on TV more.
And Aparna Nancherla has done the same thing with her anxiety.
And like, if you don't have anxiety, the way I would describe it is like there's an edgy improv group in your brain.
And John Mulaney has been cracking jokes about his own mental health struggles and addiction issues since early on in his career.
I actually just quit drinking a couple months ago because, I'm not exactly slap happy about it myself.
Meanwhile, comics like Bill Hader and Bo Burnham have been open about their experiences with performance anxiety.
To come to terms with your anxiety on the road, you know what I mean, in front of thousands of people a night, very, very abstract.
Now, stand-up comedy might not seem like the most obvious medium for exploring mental health struggles, given that for most of its history, it's peddled largely in quips, punchlines, and gags purely for laughter's sake.
I wish they made fajita cologne, because that stuff smells good.
But this recent shift raises some interesting questions. For one thing, how do we get from Bob Hope-style one-liners
I went to the dentist this morning, only had $1. What happened? Had to get buck teeth.
to comedians dissecting the most intimate details of their mental health struggles?
If I'd had a gun right here, I would have just brought it up one smooth movement. Just like going, oh, they have French crust pizza. Do.
And is this change a good thing? Are jokes about anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues just a new way to get a quick laugh out of a tough situation? Or is there something much deeper going on? Let's find out in this Wisecrack Edition on comedy and mental health. Now, before we dive into a very serious discussion of some extremely funny people, I want to give a quick shout out to the people who help us keep the cameras rolling. Our sponsor for this week, the Ridge Wallet. The holidays are coming up, so it's the perfect time to start thinking about what you're going to get your friends and family, especially the ones that are hard to buy for. People never think about upgrading their wallet, but they would love it if you got them one of these, the Ridge Wallet. It's light, sleek, and industrial. It holds up to 12 cards and has room for cash. You can shop all 30 colors and styles to find the perfect match for your loved ones. Each wallet is made with durable material and comes with a lifetime warranty, so your gift will last a lifetime. With over 40,000 five-star reviews, you can't go wrong. So don't wait for the holidays to fly by. Visit ridge.com/wisecrack to view their holiday guide, and when you're at checkout, use promo code Wisecrack for 10% off. Now back to the show. While it's no longer particularly shocking to hear a comedian joke about depression, it's worth remembering that the recent focus on mental health in stand-up is pretty unprecedented. For most of its history, stand-up comedy was less about sharing funny confessional stories or observations on stage and more about crafting and delivering clever setups and punchlines.
My friend George is a radio announcer, and when he walks under a bridge, you can't hear him talk.
In other words, comics in the early to mid-20th century largely focused on laughter for its own sake and didn't necessarily ground their material in their real-life experiences. Comics like Bob Hope, along with Jack Benny and Milton Berle, built their sets around rapid-fire jokes. While their setups often made references to their personal lives, this was only incidental. The real goal wasn't bearing their soul on stage, it was landing a surprising punchline.
And when I arrived at the airport, LBJ gave me a wonderful reception, a 21-gun salute, and I've got the powder burns to prove it.
The comedy of this era tended to be escapist, more about taking a break from life's hardships than engaging them head on. Key to that comedic escape is something called incongruity. that is deliberately creating a gap between what the audience is expecting to hear and what actually comes out of the comedian's mouth. Philosophers as disparate as Kant, Schopenhauer, and Kierkegaard have theorized that incongruity is the main ingredient in generating laughter. We laugh when something disrupts our usual mental patterns and subverts our expectations. The classic example is the person who slips on a banana peel while walking. The expectation here is the person can walk. We are very used to seeing this. We are not used to seeing a person eat instead. Thus, the incongruity. Of course, this bit has become so cliche that it's practically an expectation in its own right, which opens up the floor for new banana peel-related gags. In pursuit of incongruity, some comedians got downright weird with their sets, creating completely nonsensical material in an attempt to buck the audience's expectations. Stand-up comedians like Charlie Callis, for instance, made a decades-long career out of interrupting his own stories with bizarre, nonsensical noises and facial expressions.
Hello, is this
Even more abstractly, 80s prop comic Gallagher built entire sets around smashing watermelons with a hammer and pulling large things out of a giant couch.
Crap, here's a potato chip. Big old cram.
Hey, it was a different time. Audiences attending these kinds of shows probably weren't expecting a lot in the way of substance. But even before Gallagher's watermelon smashing, comedy was evolving to do more than just dish out jokes. Beginning in the 1950s and 60s, a so-called new wave of stand-up comics like Lenny Bruce and George Carlin began to push the boundaries of what could be said on stage by incorporating crude humor and social satire into their sets. Carlin, for instance, was famously arrested on obscenity charges following a televised routine about the dirty words one wasn't supposed to say on TV.
Intense.
In a similar vein, comics like Sam Kinison use their stage time to attack social norms and institutions generally considered sacred.
Well, Michael, if you ever think about getting married, if you ever think you've met the right woman, you want to settle down, change your life, will you do me a favor, Mike? Remember this face.
More so than earlier comedians, these comics acted as cultural critics, pointing out perceived hypocrisies. Throughout history, this has been a major function of comedy and laughter. As scholar Lawrence E. Mintz writes, the stand-up comic acts as our comic spokesperson, a mediator and articulator of our culture and our contemporary anthropologists. More broadly, Mintz contends that in certain contexts, the stand-up comic is granted permission to express feelings that would be difficult to share outside the comedy club.
You are Satan's spawn, filling the world with bile and garbage. You are and you are us. Kill yourself. It's the only way to save your soul.
While performing, a skilled comic can enact an audience's frustrations with the very real difficulties of relationships, politics, and so on. In this way, they can provide insights into our shared human shortcomings, insights that would be entirely unacceptable to share at the company picnic. Still, for the most part, new wave comics tended to direct their criticism outward at the broader society rather than attempting introspection. And that's what's so interesting about the present moment, which we will playfully dub the new age of comedy. More so than ever before, comics are turning a Carlin-esque critical eye inward to comment on themselves and their community.
Yeah, I think it's hard for black men especially to talk about depression because we have so many cool words available to us to undermine how we really feel, you know?
As a result, they're able to broach hard truths that for years have been off the table, even for the boldest of comics.
And trust me when I say this, nothing is scarier than having to fight your own mind.
But is this necessarily a good thing? That brings us to one of the central conflicts in this new age. Namely, is laughter A, the best medicine?
Hey, we're, everything you do is gonna end in annihilation and entropy, so what's the point? I'm like, you're right, you win again, depression.
Or B, an unhealthy coping mechanism?
Depressed, up, looking for any excuse to not get help. And the fact that some of my heroes were messed up was a justification for that.
That clip's from Laughing Matters, a recent documentary about comedy and mental health. In it, famous actors and comics including Sarah Silverman, Wayne Brady, and Rainn Wilson speak candidly about the mental health issues they've dealt with and explore the role that comedy has played in their struggles. The documentary explores the potential harm of using comedy to escape one's mental health problems.
I think performing can be a temporary high, but like all temporary highs, it doesn't last. And you can chase that high night after night after night, but eventually there's gonna be a club that's not open, or you're gonna have a night off and you're gonna have to deal with what happens in the silence.
Like any other addiction, the high of a great performance can temporarily mask the pain of depression, anxiety, and so on. But it does so without actually helping to solve the underlying issues. And in some cases, it can make them worse.
And if you are thinking about doing comedy as a substitute for therapy, it doesn't work. I tried for a long time. It doesn't work.
To put it bluntly, the documentary suggests that comedy and laughter have been unproductive and even destructive for many comedians, a way to tune out from a life that's falling apart. If that's true, is it fixable? And specifically, is there a more constructive way to make people laugh? One that's less about avoiding painful truths and more about facing them. To find out, we can turn to a guy who's not exactly known for his punchy one-liners, philosopher and horse enthusiast, Frederick Nietzsche. In general, Nietzsche had pretty serious beef with laughter because he viewed it as a potential threat to our quest for self-actualization. As scholar Mark Wheats notes, Nietzsche thought the most important human pursuit was embracing our future, our desires, and our power in the face of life's absurdities. For him, laughter undercuts this pursuit. Indeed, according to Wheats' interpretation of Nietzsche, laughter, with its ability to ground us in the present moment by overwhelming us with giggle fits and good feelings, can distract from the all-important philosophical quest, constantly striving to improve ourselves in order to build a better future. To put it another way, laughter has a tendency to lift us momentarily out of time by cutting tension and poking holes in the stories we construct for ourselves. Laughter, in other words, is a loss of the creative tension that the Nietzschean hero needs to construct a meaningful narrative of their life, a waste of a vital resource. While Nietzsche is hardly an expert in lulls, and stand-up comedy as we know it totally didn't exist in 19th century Germany, he does have a point worth considering. As we've seen, a lot of successful comedy works by creating incongruity, pointing out gaps between expectation and reality. In other words, undercutting various narratives we tell ourselves about the way things ought to go. Charlie Callis does this by literally cutting himself off while he tells a brief story. And Sam Kinison does this by poking holes in the societal narrative of a happy, loving marriage. In various ways, comedians have historically generated a lot of laughter by disrupting the flow of personal and societal narratives. Going by Nietzsche, we might consider this a bad thing, because while comedians are deconstructing old and useless narratives, they're not necessarily offering new, more productive ones to take their place. And to bring it back to mental health, in Nietzschean terms, comedy has failed some pretty funny people by offering them a way to temporarily undercut the narrative of their own lives. In the process, they can numb out and avoid facing their own existential dread and the mental health issues that might come with it. A lot of existing stand-up comedy, in other words, confirms Nietzsche's worst fears about laughter's potentially harmful effects on the human spirit.
Well, excuse me!
We can't help but wonder if Nietzsche might have been more okay with laughter if he spent his time joking with his friends instead of crying alone in the woods. Which, hey, you do you, Frederick. Nevertheless, this criticism raises a question. Should comics try to use laughter to confront their problems rather than to escape from them? And what might such a new approach be? While we have no evidence that any of the comedians interviewed in Laughing Matters dig Nietzsche, they do outline what a more constructive approach to comedy might look like. Specifically, an approach that transforms their struggles into something of a greater value rather than just fodder for laughter.
We all have these kind of things that happen to us, and we can get through them. You know, we can get through it and transform it and use it.
Trauma and tragedy, according to these comics, are not merely things to laugh at, even if it feels good. Rather, they are the raw materials that comedians can use to craft entirely new narratives, instead of merely shredding apart outdated ones.
You know, if you're an artist who has a chance to say something that might actually connect with people or help people, and you don't take that chance, what good are you?
This approach to comedy is distinctly Nietzschean, Mark Wheats contends that in his later work, the philosopher made a kind of uneasy peace with laughter by challenging his readers to will a new kind of laughter, one which leaves us both amused and philosophically elevated. To put it another way, Nietzsche believed that a constructive, self-affirming laughter was possible, but had yet to be realized in his own time. He challenged his readers to invent a new form of laughter that would support heroic striving in the face of adversity, rather than denigrating such efforts as being pointless and silly. And we'd argue that the stand-up comic who uses their struggles with mental health as material is helping to make that new laughter a reality. When a comic crafts a good story about their struggles, they aren't just entertaining, they're also creating a heroic narrative that shows them facing off against the real challenges of being human. And in the case of mental health, that means the difficulty of being completely reliant on a blob of electrified goo that frequently malfunctions. In other words, they're responding to Nietzsche's challenge by generating laughter that brings audiences and themselves into direct contact with the past and the future, rather than merely escaping into the hilarity of the present. We can see this in the work of Sarah Silverman. Like the other comedians interviewed in Laughing Matters, she cites her difficult childhood as a sort of origin story for her comedy career. In this way, she takes a direct look at her past rather than running from it.
100% of comedians become comedians because somewhere in their childhood they needed to be funny in order to survive.
Her refusal to use laughter as a way of covering up past traumas pops up again when Silverman describes what happened to the doctor who prescribed her Xanax as a teenager.
The psychiatrist who originally put me on it hung himself. I mean, I can't just skate by that, it's crazy.
Notice how Silverman laughs and smiles while telling the story, but refuses to dismiss her psychiatrist's suicide as something inconsequential. She can acknowledge the irony in the situation and even chuckle at it without denying the traumatic effect that these events had on her younger self. What's more, she explains precisely what that effect was, drawing a narrative arc from her past through her present and into the future.
These years of torture and shame kind of became my superpower.
Silverman is literally framing her comedy career in terms of a superhero's origin story. Far from avoiding her problems, Silverman embraces them as a key part of her creative process, without romanticizing them as the sole source of her funniness. Depression doesn't make a joke out of Silverman. Silverman makes jokes out of depression. She demonstrates that comedians can transform mental health struggles from a taboo subject into something worth talking about, even celebrating, if only for the duration of a set. Aparna Nancherla, for her part, applies a similar technique to the topic of anxiety.
I feel like it's weirder to not have anxiety than to have it, because I feel like if you're not scared, you're not paying attention, you know? Like, I feel like if you open a newspaper today, skim maybe 3 headlines, you're just like, seems cool. It's like, what? Everything's on fire. Even the newspaper is on fire. Like, what are you so chill about?
Here, Nancherla frames anxiety not as a failing, but as the only rational response to a society that insists we post happy photos of ourselves on Instagram while the world crumbles around us. That's not to say that everyone needs to get stoked on their own depression or anxiety, but it's one way to deal. Comics can also transform trauma into connection with other comics or audience members or insomniacs watching grainy videos on YouTube.
It's one of the reasons that I love being a comedian, because if I can find comedy people anywhere I go in the world, and I know I'm gonna hear good stories, and I'm gonna be sitting around with people who are also, if not okay with being up, at least perhaps more honest about it than other folks might be.
And what's more Nietzschean than transforming trauma into purpose? By using their darkest moments to generate laughter, these comics aren't just constructing their own heroic narratives, they're offering us the chance to create ours too. In other words, if this guy can use humor to overcome his mental health struggles, then maybe there's hope for us and our friends and our cranky coworkers.
The real mission is if your kid is sick, or your cousin is suffering, or the guy on the other side of the cubicle wall shows up and you never know which person you're gonna get. How can I make those people understand that that person's not being a dickhead that day, and that person's not being melodramatic, and it's not because they're going through a phase, it's because they're sick.
By making comedy intended to keep us alive and striving for something greater, these comedians are generating the kind of laughter which Nietzsche might be damn proud of. A laughter that serves to construct rather than to tear down. And that's nothing to laugh at. Nah, just kidding. That's pretty funny.
I don't want to be out in the wasteland fat and depressed. Like that, there's not going to be any Prozac after the collapse.
But what do you guys think? Can comedy help us all become better people? Or should comedians just stick to smashing watermelons? Shout out to Gallagher. Let us know in the comments. And since we're on the subject, if you or anyone you know is going through a hard time, please reach out and ask for help. Mostly because you deserve it inherently, but also because y'all mean a lot to us. And if you ever need it, you can find the link and phone number for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline right here in the description below. Big thanks to our patrons for all your support, but be sure to subscribe and ring that bell. And as always, thanks for watching, man. Peace.